844-527-8723. Let's go to the Skype Maker hotline and say hello to Michael Hichborn, who is the founder of the Lepanto Institute, and a great guy to boot, and a world traveler to boot, and a bolo to boot. Hey, my bolo brother, how are you?
I'm doing great. Good to talk to you.
So explain to the audience what a bolo is.
Bolo means be on the lookout. So, I'm public enemy number one in the eyes of certain people, I suppose.
Now, you were a bolo according to the USCCB, or somebody attending the USCCB.
Yeah, the USCCB had a convocation, they called it, down in Orlando, Florida. And for whatever reason, the security personnel decided to put up a poster of what they called potential disruptors and protesters. Now, I have never protested any USCCB event in my life. I've actually attended attended as in I made a presence known while I was at the USCCB Fall Assembly a couple of times, but I haven't been there in 3 years. And I never once interrupted anything anyone did. But they decided that Michael Hichborn is too much of a problem for us, so we're going to make sure that if he shows up, we're going to kick him out or make sure that people don't talk to him. So,
well, hey, count yourself in good companies there, because they also were on the lookout for Michael Voris as well. We don't.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want any. We don't want any press sniffing around in this event. Now, for those who don't know, USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, is what that is, and as I asked you, because for the uninitiated, Michael was on this show last on May the 13th with Chris Ferrara. He reached live from the Westin in Richmond, Virginia, when we did the first Fatima apparition show. And that's where Michael and I met. Michael then whisked himself off to Italy and to Rome. And did you come back in time to try and go to the UCCB to go out and cover it, or did you not intend to go whatsoever?
To be perfectly honest, it wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even know about it. That's what's so ironic about this whole thing. I was so busy traveling, and then my grandfather died, and so we had a funeral and everything, and it was so far off of my scope of looking at what they were doing that the fact that they drew my attention to it is pretty darn ironic. But from what I hear, and I have to be fair about this, I've heard from people that were there, and they said that a lot of stuff that went on there at the convocation was actually pretty, what they called conservative. That they actually had Latin in the Mass. Ooh. And
no, not that.
Yeah, and no guitars, that's a step in the right direction, right?
No guitars, no banjo. Oh, Father, next thing you know, you're going to tell me you're going to bring the guitars in and the singing and all the touching of other people during the Mass.
Right. But it wasn't the Religious Education Congress of Los Angeles, so, that's a step in the right direction. But, I just figure if it was actually something that was more of the conservative bent, why would they want to prevent me from knowing about it or actually showing up and talking to people? I would think that they would want me to actually see what they were doing that was going in the right direction.
Well, now you have spoken in the past, like, for example, at Front Royal, about the USCCB in not so flattering terms, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is that the USCCB is for all intents and purposes, it's a lobbying entity run by a bunch of bureaucrats, not necessarily by the bishops. I mean, the bishops are the heads of various subcommittees, and they kind of guide the ship. But the fact of the matter is the lobbyists are the ones who pretty much run the show. And, the USCCB, for instance, for the last several years, has lobbied Congress to fund both USAID and PEPFAR. And those two agencies are the federal government's biggest branches of promotion for birth control. And the USCCB is saying, hey, we want you to make sure that these two programs are funded. Well, the question is, well, why would you want that? And the answer is because USAID and PEPFAR give Catholic Relief Services most of their money.
And of course, and if you don't know, Catholic Relief Services in the United States and through the USCCB, I can't remember who she was. Maybe it wasn't Hillary White. Oh, gosh. Who wrote the story for The Remnant last year that I read here on the show? The USCCB received $216 million from the Obama administration. That number is shocking. Most of it to repatriate Muslim refugees here in the United States, or much of it to repatriate or to patriate Muslim refugees, close quote, in the United States. That's one of their signal activities. Did you look into that?
I sure did. In fact, what I did in my presentation, I broke down how much money the federal government gave to the USCCB in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, and 2014. And over those years, they gave the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops almost $500 million. And that money was specifically for their immigrant and refugee programs. Now, when we look at what the USCCB has said, when Donald Trump announced that he was going to cut back on the refugee program, he was going to cut back on the number of refugees coming in, he was certainly going to cut back on people coming in from predominantly Muslim countries, the USCCB balked and said, well, this is a horrible thing that you're going to reduce these numbers and reduce the amount of refugees you're going to bring in. What the USCCB wasn't saying is that it was getting paid per head. So every single refugee that came in was money in their pockets. And that's a problem. When you incentivize a program like this, and the USCCB and other entities become addicted to the federal money, then when you cut back on it, bringing it back to, let's say, levels that Barack Obama had originally had, it's I don't know. It's just a terrible thing that the Conference of Catholic Bishops has made itself more an agency of the federal government than an agency of God.
Yeah, and the takeaway from that is, and I always think about this, and I talked about it several times, maybe I need to delve a little deeper into it. In the 1950s, there was an agreement that was made, and it wasn't just made between the Catholic Church, it was made between all Christian denominations that were functioning and practicing at the time, that they would agree to be the subject of being listed and categorized as non-profit for the purpose of taxation. Now, what most people don't know is that in exchange for the silence, the church basically agreed to do a couple of things, and one of them is that they would not proselytize against the government from the pulpit. So this is not only a scandal against the church and her teaching authority, I think. It's also part of just a continuation of the corrupt system of redistributing wealth.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at what the USCCB does through its various charitable agencies, they call them charitable agencies. For instance, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, which isn't a charity at all, it funds nothing but community organizing groups that were set up by Saul Alinsky. The whole thing is designed to agitate the citizens so that they will rise up against the way things are normally run and lobby the government to start distributing wealth in a very socialistic manner.
Sure.
And I've researched the CCHD for years, and one of the things that I've found is that many of these groups are highly affiliated with the Socialist Democratic Party of the United States of America.
You mean the Socialist Democrat Party, or are you saying the Democrat Party that is socialist?
No, I mean the Socialist Democrats of America.
So
the ones whose logo is the handshake with the rose in the middle.
Ah, yes, I've seen it. Michael Hichborn is the founder of the Lepanto Institute, is on the Dude Maker Skype line with us. Our telephone number, 844-527-8723. You can listen free on our website at crusadechannel.com. What are some of the other shocking things that people may not know that the USCCB is engaging in? And they're engaging in it all the while purporting to be carrying out the charitable work of Roman Catholic Church.
Well, like I said, when when the USCCB lobbied Congress for all that funding for USAID and PEPFAR, what was really terrible about it was that their director that was in charge of that particular program, a guy named Dr. Stephen Kalecki, he denied that the funding was actually going to contraception, and the excuse that he gave. You have to be very careful with the language they use, because the excuse that he gave was, oh, well, it's okay for us to make this kind of request because, CRS has an exemption clause from the government that permits it to receive these funds without participating in these contraceptive programs. But the response is, no, you asked Congress to take our tax money and apply it to these programs that are distributing all kinds of contraception throughout the world. And you're telling me that the reason it's okay is that, well, you have an exemption. Well, that's fine for you, but what about us? And, finally, he actually had to publicly admit, well, not publicly, it got published by me. He had to admit that, well, yes, they do support condoms and contraception and that kind of thing, but, it's not the most important thing they do. They save lives. And that's the repeated mantra from these people. It's okay for this program, it's okay for that program because they save lives. And, with regard to the Catholic Relief Services, one of the things that I've researched heavily about them is that over the course of the years, they've been giving tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to organizations that are themselves distributing contraception, performing abortions, performing sterilizations. And when I ask about this, they say, well, but it's a pass-through grant from the government. It's not actually our money, so it's okay. And then when I point out, well, but Catholic Relief Services is participating in this program that is actively distributing contraception. Last year, I did a report, CRS. I found inventory reports showing that CRS had received and distributed 2.25 million units of contraception, including IUDs, including Depo-Provera. And I pointed this out, and CRS's response was, well, we can see how it would seem like we did this, but we didn't.
As you're talking, I have to. I was resisting the urge to play some background music for you. Because it's fitting. Nothing brings out the specter of evil more than Darth Vader and the John Williams' Empire Strikes Back theme. Now, there are a couple of things, a couple of ways I could go with this. I'm going to hit you with one that a friend of mine, I've actually heard him vocalize this. And this is what I think is probably the most damaging aspect. Well, there's two damage. Number one, again, the scandal aspect. All this does is give ammo to the enemies of the church. Capital T, capital C, the church. And Michael and I are not trying to play enemies. By the way, aren't you being enemies by it? No, because we're being scandalized by this. By trying to practice the faith and actually trying to live it as we're all commanded to do. When someone does it and they do it publicly like this, or maybe under the shroud, they're doing it publicly, but with the patina of secrecy to mask some of it, they are scandalizing our efforts to do it. Is the word canonically? It's not. That's not the word. Okay, to do it canonically. That's one. But the second part is this. Talk about breeding cynicism. Now, if you're sitting in the pews and they're passing the collection baskets around, and we do have a responsibility to fund and to upkeep our parishes, right? No one would disagree with that. But when the basket comes around, and someone from the USCCB or the CRS or whatever gets up there and makes an appeal, and they appeal to the laity that's in the pews, and they say, we're doing this and we're doing. They don't tell you about any of these gaudy, diabolical activities. In the first instance, you're actually getting Catholics in the pews to participate in this. That's one thing that's not acceptable. In the second instance, what about the people that know of this and say, well, I'm not going to give at all for fear that Father, of insert parish name here, is going to cut a check for $5,000 to the CRS because even though he doesn't say it from the pulpit, he's actually a promoter of it. No good, my point is that no good comes of this, Michael.
No, you're absolutely right. And what's more, when you look at the way CRS operates and the way they raise money, I don't even understand why they even bother to try and raise funds from parishes anyway, considering when you look at how much money they pull in from the Rice Bowl campaign, during Lent, you get the little rice bowls and you're supposed to fill it up with your loose change. They only make about $7 million from that. And that covers about, 2/3 of their top 8 paid employees. So I don't even understand why they bother because they're pulling in $500 million a year from the federal government. So what's $7 million to that? What do they care?
Appearances, maybe?
Maybe. Maybe it's about making sure that they have maybe there's a requirement from the federal government that they pool in a certain percentage of money in order to get money from the federal government in order to maintain their faith-based status to say that they are a Catholic entity, That's
a shame when you have to.
I actually don't know.
That's a shame when you have to say faith-based in air finger quotation marks.
Yeah.
Faith-based.
Well, there's nothing that they do that's specifically Catholic. What was it? 2 years ago? 3 years ago, there was an article that came out where one of their directors for overseas programs said that they were proud that they don't evangelize. Well, I'm sorry, you're a Catholic agency. What's your purpose?
844-527-8723 is our telephone number. If you have any questions for Michael Hichborn, you can go into the chat room. We are live at mikechurch.com. I'm in the chat room, and I'm looking at it, and I can forward your questions along. I'm going to move to another little area here. Christopher, could you re-queue up clip number 1 from President Trump? Michael, we didn't talk about this in show prep, but and by the by, if folks want to read your entire presentation at Front Royal about the USCCB, where would they find it at?
Well, they can actually watch the presentation on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
The whole presentation is about an hour long, but if they go to YouTube and they look up USCCB and Michael Hichborn, it'll be the #1 video that pops up.
Okay, so does the Lepanto Institute have a channel on YouTube?
They do.
Okay, so then you can find it by Lepanto, Lepanto, Lepanto Institute. When last you and I spoke on air, we were talking about President Reagan and his speech in front of the Portuguese Parliament in 1985, where and this has just been lost into the mist of history, where President Reagan mentioned the miracle of the sun. He mentioned Our Lady. He mentioned Pope John Paul II, and he mentioned the 3 children and the apparitions of Fatima. And he mentioned them all reverently and in context. And it was a very moving speech that most people are totally unfamiliar with, and there was a backstory that went along with that. Well, did you hear President Trump's address in front of the new monument in Warsaw?
I heard about it, but I haven't actually had a chance to listen to it yet.
Now, you, I'm sure, would agree with me. Let's see. You're not agreeing with me. We're agreeing with tradition that says that in our sacramental lives, grace abounds, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So in Melania Trump's sacramental life, grace must abound, right?
Must.
Okay. And Melania Trump's praying of her rosary now in the White House, which you and I are going to assume that she's doing, grace must abound. I went to great pains to try to explain this in the first hour, that when you're in the presence of this is a good thing. Now, there are many of those out there that, and regardless of what President Trump says, it doesn't matter because, he was grabbing women by the you-know-what back in 2003, and he did this. He's 5 times divorced, all of this other stuff. And I read all this, and I go, have you people never heard of mercy? Especially when Catholics and Christians throw these stones. Hello, have you never heard the story of Saint Augustine? I mean, for heaven's sake, the guy was the biggest. He was Hugh Hefner. I'll give you a comparison to 343 or 360 A.D. Saint Augustine of Hippo, or Augustine of Hippo, son of Monica, was he was a serial fornicator.
Yes.
Serial fornicator. He was a serial public drunk. Most people don't know that his mother fought alcoholism her entire life.
But you know what? Mike, I actually have to throw this in here. What's so hugely, massively ironic is that the whole crowd, the mercy crowd of the Catholic Church, are the ones who condemn him the harshest.
Yes, and they don't see that grace is working with this man. Now, I'm going to repeat this. I'm not saying that he's converted. I'm not saying that he's become a Catholic. I'm not saying that he's good for the church. I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that grace is working in this man. And I would say to anyone that would say no, I would say, well, don't you want it to work? I mean, he is. Mm-hmm. Whether I agree with the existence in his current monstrous size of the federal government or not, he is the president. So yes, I would prefer that grace was working with the man. Now, I want Christopher is going to play a clip of his speech. I want you to listen to this, Michael, and let's talk about this.
Sure.
Here you go.
What great spirit. We salute your noble sacrifice, and we pledge to always remember your fight for Poland and for freedom. Thank you. Thank you. This monument reminds us that more than 150,000 Poles died during that desperate struggle to overthrow oppression. From the other side of the river, the Soviet armed forces stopped and waited. They watched as the Nazis ruthlessly destroyed the city, viciously murdering men, women, and children. They tried to destroy this nation forever by shattering its will to survive. But there is a courage and a strength deep in the Polish character that no one could destroy. The Polish martyr, Bishop Michael Kozel, said it well: more horrifying than a defeat of arms is a collapse of the human spirit. Through 4 decades of communist rule, Poland and the other captive nations of Europe endured a brutal campaign to demolish freedom, your faith, your laws, your history, your identity, indeed the very essence of your culture and your humanity. Yet through it all, you never lost that spirit.
Okay. We'll pause right there. Michael, now, he's mentioned, if we could just get Pope Francis to mention Bishop Kavlik.
Oh, boy.
What an improvement that would be. Now, contained in that, now, when he's talking about the tradition and the history of the Polish people and what it is that communism tried to stamp out, he's talking about the Polish and their Catholic faith. There can be no other tradition, and because that is the Polish tradition if we're talking about the good, the true, and the beautiful. I'm sitting here and I'm staring at a prayer card that we're actually having translated into English and are making of Matka Boża Leżaska. That's Our Lady of Leżaska. Did you know that there are 3 Our Lady shrines in Poland? There's Our Lady of Częstochowa, which you know of. There's Our Lady of Leżaska, and there's Our Lady and Saint Maximilian Kolbe. I didn't know this. Founded Our Lady Immaculate. 3 shrines. Now that's what the President of the United States, even if he doesn't know it, that's what he's talking about. If you're not the least bit encouraged by that, well, then you're just a cynic, and you really aren't looking for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Now, what did you hear?
Well, in listening to that speech, what I really heard was him talking about the fact that what brought Poland out of its darkest period was its faith.
Right.
And what faith are they talking about? It's not Protestantism.
So, what faith are they talking about? Well, and by the way, if Christopher, do you have the whole clip, the whole speech there? Because he's introduced by Melania. If you don't have the audio, I have it here. Hello, Poland. Thank you very much. My husband and I have enjoyed visiting your beautiful country. But what an asset she is, by the by. I want to thank President and Mrs. Duda. You got it? Here you go, Michael.
Thank you very much. My husband and I have enjoyed visiting your beautiful country. I want to thank President and Mrs. Duda for their warm welcome and their generous hospitality. I had the opportunity to visit the Copernicus Science Center today.
Copernicus was a priest, by the way.
Not only informative,
Right.
but thoughtful in its mission, which is to inspire people to observe, experiment, ask questions, and seek answers. I can think of no better purpose for such a wonderful science center. Thank you to all who were involved in giving us the tour, especially the children who made it such a wonderful experience. As many of you know, a main focus of my husband's presidency is safety and security of the American people. I think as all of us can agree, people should be able to live their lives without fear, no matter what country they live in. That is my wish for all of us around the world. Thank you again for this wonderful welcome to your very special country. Your kindness and gracious hospitality will not be forgotten. And now it is my honor to introduce to you my husband, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Okay. So now let's just compare and contrast here and be thankful for the little things. Imagine that's Bill Clinton introducing the she-demon herself. I just want to thank all of you, and especially all you hot young women. I mean, all the young girls who showed us all around the science center. You know, we got into a little science back here in the back room. I didn't just say that out loud. Anyways, old Iron Pants Hillary's up next here. Poland, thank you very much. I'll see you interns after the show. Just compare and contrast just the graciousness and the grace of Melania Trump and introducing Donald Trump to this audience in Poland, as opposed to what could be representing the United States. And if you don't see that there is some grace working there, okay, explain to me that. Okay, Michael Hichborn, explain to me what is at work there then.
Nothing. If it's not grace, then there's nothing. You know, I do find it interesting when we listen to Donald Trump talking about the history of Poland and the spirit of Poland. And, you know, Poland went through a very dark period. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the dark period was preceded by an even darker period in Poland's history, which was that in 1932, it was the first European nation to permit abortion to be performed in the country. And they changed the penal code that legalized abortion. And I would say that Poland, because of the invasions of Germany and because of the occupation by the communists, was heavily punished for it. Now, when you look at how Pope St. John Paul II came out of Poland, and what did he do? But he wrote, all kinds of stuff about the culture of life and fighting against the culture of death. It was a complete reversal. And I think that Poland, by and large, is now one of the shining bulwarks of the church fighting against the culture of death. They actually just recently enthroned Christ the King as their official king of Poland. I believe they just consecrated the entire country to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart.
Wow.
You can't find a more Catholic country in the world right now.
Now, there are going to be those who are going to be cynical about this, and they're going to say, well, they did this and they did that, and it's not a real consecration, this and that. So what difference does it make? If you're making a public affirmation of the faith, just be thankful that that was made, and we'll worry about how sincere they are. Maybe instead of babbling on endlessly and criticizing, maybe we ought to just be taken to the rosary and praying for these people. Now, didn't they also just make abortion illegal again?
They did.
So
they did.
They joined Hungary. Now, there's something in Central Europe, which was the seat, right, the root of the cancer that was communism. In Central Europe, and then and we see this in Russia. One of my correspondents, one of the correspondents that we're blessed to call our correspondents, Eben Tranholm. Eben does some work for Vatican Radio, and she's one of the few Catholics that remain and that lives in Denmark, Copenhagen. But last I spoke to Eben, she had just returned from 4 weeks in Moscow. And she actually went to the consecration of the new Orthodox temple in Moscow, and President Putin also went to it. And she told me, she told the audience here, she said, it's not a ruse. These people are not trying to set the rest of the world up so they can come in and bomb everybody and kill everyone. There is a real revival of Christianity going on in Russia. You just described what's going on in Poland. We know what happened in Hungary back in 2012, 2013, that the Hungarians said, look, Protestants and Catholics, we got to get together and we've got to stop. We have to rid ourselves of purely secular forms of government, because if we don't, then we're going to have communism here all over again, or some other horrid form of government. And so they made a constitution, and they basically stated that the moral law of God comes first, and no laws can be written that are repugnant to it. There's something going on in Central Europe, isn't there, Mr. Hichborn?
You bet. Absolutely. There most definitely is. When you look at what happened during the communist occupation, the very beginning of the communist occupation of Central and Eastern Europe, Austria, most people forget that Austria was actually under communist occupation for a while too. And what's fascinating is that the bishops of Austria collectively consecrated Austria to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And then they also instituted a regular prayer cycle, public rosaries, in Austria, led by the bishops, and the Soviets, for no explanation. There was no reason why they did this. They left. They just left.
Now, I have the story here. Now, somebody posted it in our chat room. If you'd like to join the chat, and this is one of the things that we offer here during the Mike Church Show, and it becomes very useful not only for other people that are listening, because you can share information, but it becomes useful for me, because you guys find things for me in real time. Here on November the 23rd, 2016, Poland joins with Peru and Ukraine in recent public consecrations of their countries to Christ the King and the Immaculate Heart. This is SSPX News and Events. Quote, during a solemn ceremony at the Church of Divine Mercy in Krakow, the Catholic bishops of Poland officially recognized Christ as King of Poland. The ceremony, which took place on November the 19th, was carried out in the presence of Polish President Andrzej Duda, who is a philosopher in himself. This act of consecration was repeated in all of the churches of Poland on Sunday, November the 20th, the day when the majority of the Roman Catholic Church celebrates the feast of Christ the King. according to the revised liturgical calendar of 1970. This recognition of Christ's kingship on this day is laudable, particularly given that the divine office and Mass for the revised feast of Christ the King removes all the traditional references to our Lord's earthly rule. These unfortunate changes, which were made to appease the liberal belief that the church should have no role in political life, thankfully did not stop the Polish bishops from following the teaching set forth in Pope Pius XI's encyclical Quas Primus. That's good stuff there. Now, is it a perfect world? No. Is there more to be done? Yes. But there are things that are happening out there. Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute is my special guest here on the Dude Maker Hotline. Now let's go back to President Trump's speech and the clip that I played. He mentioned one of the Polish martyrs, and the Bishop Kozlov. And Kozlov, I'm sorry. The Warsaw speech mentions, I have this from Father George Rutler at Crisis Magazine today, President Trump's Warsaw speech. I just want to read this to you. The Warsaw speech mentioned three priests, Copernicus, John Paul II, and Michael Kozlov. The latter was the Bishop Włocławek, I think that's how you say that, who was martyred by the Nazis in Dachau, along with 220 of his priests in 1943. After lengthy torture, the Nazi doctor, Joseph Snice, injected him with a dose of phenol to make easier his way to eternity. St. John Paul II beatified Bishop Kozlov 2 days after Reagan's Berlin speech. Dr. Snice has his disciples now in much of Europe, and he would have a busy practice today on our own golden shores in California, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and the nation's very capital. And then he adds this. Among the irritations in the Warsaw speech were these words. Now, he's talking about the libs that are irritated by President Trump's speech, and they are. Quote, "We put faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, at the center of our lives." Close quote. As that was being said, the parents of a gravely ill child, Charlie Gard, were tussling with government officials in London who did not want to release their infant to them. So again, there's good stuff in President Trump's speech. This is the second visit that he has now made to Europe. In the first visit, he visited with Pope Francis, and we saw Melania Trump actually getting her rosary blessed, hers, not the souvenir one that the fridge magnet one that you get at the Vatican. We saw her getting her rosary blessed, and now the president goes and gives a speech in front of a monument to a reviving Catholic. I know Poles, and they're probably sending me text messages right now going, "Michael, Poland is not Catholic country no more. You must tell guests to cease and desist. We may have a revival going on, but not Catholic country. If you go, you'd see all the evil that's still there. There may still be evil there, but there is progress being made. And my point is that we ought to be right. You can't just always look for the dour and for the wrong, right?
I completely agree. You know, one thing that I have to throw in here is that there is a problem with both the traditional side of the Catholics and the more liberal side, and that's that they keep looking at this world, and they're looking for perfection of some kind in this world, and there won't be any perfection in this world, only except at the altar of Christ. And what we have to do is draw as many people to that altar as possible. We are all sinners. We are all going to be sinners, but that doesn't mean put your blinders on and don't look at the horrible things that are taking place and expose them. Yes, absolutely, we have to expose them. We have to root them out because they are causing people to lose their souls.
Sure. On
the other hand, we can't hope and look for perfection in this world. And I hear it so many times now, people talking about how, but it may be good or this may be good, but then this bad thing. Can't we just appreciate and enjoy some of the good things for what they are sometimes?
Well, I wholeheartedly concur. and hey, brother, you and I just did. So let's give ourselves a little round of applause.
Right.
All right, Michael, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for reaching out to Celeste and being grateful with your time again today. Folks, if you want to reach Michael, just follow the Lepanto Institute at lepantoinstitute.org, right?
Absolutely. That's it.
Lepanto.org. And if you don't know, what Michael's doing is looking into the scandals. And he's looking. That's what he's looking for. He's looking for the scandals, like, for example, this ongoing scandal that you're covering in Malta, right?
Yeah, I've been covering that, and I've been covering a lot of stuff with CRS and CCHD, and I've got a few other things coming down the pipe too.
Okay, well, we'll stay in touch, and we're always here to relay the news. Michael, thank you very much for your time, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. God bless you. God bless your audience.
All right, God bless you, too. Hey, folks, Celeste is here with the news. It's the Mike Church Show. I'll be back with much more. We have at least an hour left to go here at the Mike Church Show on the Crusade Channel at crusadechannel.com and at mikechurch.com, always free on our site and on our app. Look for it in the Google Play and the iTunes Store today. Now, here's Celeste Youngblood live from the Crusade Channel News Desk and the Veritas Radio Network News Bureau with your 8 a.m. headlines. Celeste?